Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final panel of the day. We've saved the best for last. We're here to talk about a subject that is really near and dear to the Atlantic Council's heart, which is forging a united security front ahead of Europe's second winter of war. Europe's energy security, Ukraine's energy security, just heard from the minister, is critically important. And last winter, it was about providing supply, affordable supply, trying to avoid competition between Asia and Europe, and still maintaining decarbonization goals. But the war continues, and the energy security challenge continues as well. And so today we're going to talk about what can be done. I think, as you know, the United States has tried to do its share. I think 67% of US LNG goes to Europe. We're now the world's top LNG exporter. I think we're at 12 BCF a day now. We're going to 13 BCF a day next year as we have more projects coming online. So in this panel today, we're going to talk about what the outlook is for this winter, what the role is of LNG, US LNG, but also nuclear power and energy efficiency and clean energy more broadly, and how we can provide security of supply to Europe and maintain our decarbonization goals. So we're gonna jump right in, and we're gonna start. We're really privileged to have Lithuania's Vice Minister of Energy, Minister Garbaliauskaite. And let me start with you first. What is the outlook for Europe's energy security this winter? And with Lithuania's Klaipėda terminal, what is your role in providing a gateway for energy security for the rest of Europe?
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a great honor to be part of this crucial discussion today on this topic. And to address this question, I will outline first where we stand and how we got there, and then I'll touch the immediate security risks and Ukraine's future role in European energy security. And maybe later on I'll share the long-term vision of Lithuania. So Lithuania and the entire region remains on a high alert, making significant preparations on both national and EU level. So we've stored sufficient amounts of natural gas in our neighboring country, Latvia's regional underground storage, aligning with the EU goals, that is 0.5 terawatt hours for vulnerable customers and 1 terawatt hour for the gas it needs for isolated operation. So our crisis management plans are updated and in line. So we have to admit that energy security was quite overlooked in Europe for a long time, and unfortunately it took us a war to put it back high on the EU agenda. So in the meantime, Lithuania currently stands as a 3-0 zone, so we import no gas, no electricity, and no oil from Russia. This is a result of long-term efforts and strengthened energy security. We have never learned the hard way lessons on the past. So, as you mentioned, building an oil terminal in 1999 and establishing the LNG terminal in Klaipėda in 2014, and strengthening gas and electricity interconnectors with our neighboring countries, Sweden and Latvia and Poland. This allows us to diversify our energy supply and cut gas imports from Russia very quickly. So since the war started, around 60% of our LNG imported via Lithuanian terminal in Klaipėda came from United States of America. However, the brutal war in Ukraine is not over, and Europe has to survive this winter as a whole, together with Ukraine. So our collective efforts must support Ukraine and mitigate potential further damage and ensure adequate energy supply for Ukraine. So this way we are supporting our very important partner. So post-war, Ukraine could significantly contribute to European energy security in a couple of ways. So first of all, We need Ukraine's expertise to protect energy infrastructure and keep it resilient against physical and cyber threats. And secondly, Ukraine's pivotal for security of supply. So the EU requires increased storage capacities to stabilize prices and meet energy demands. And thirdly, also Ukraine holds untapped zero-carbon energy potential. So to achieve the EU's 2050 zero-carbon goal, decarbonization will drive electrification significantly, raising electricity demand. So in shortly, that is where we stand at the moment.
Terrific, thanks very much. Alan, let me turn to you next. Alan Armstrong, CEO of the Williams Companies, and you're also here at COP28 wearing another hat as part of the partnership to address global emissions. So let me ask you sort of a three-part question. First, if you can talk about what's the outlook for US supply to Europe now, and if we are stuck in a frozen conflict for a couple of years, what is the ability of US industry to grow its supply, especially if we're seeing China come back? And for the third part of the hat trick, and how do you do all of this and still provide assurance to Europe that the US is providing the lowest emissions gas that can be had?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, and thanks to Atlantic Council for putting on such a great program this week. It's been really, I think, some of the most interesting discussions I've heard this week, so thank you all for doing that. So first of all, the U.S. we're just to kind of give you some rough numbers here, we're at about 13 BCF a day now of export capacity out of the U.S. That moves up a little bit and up and down depending on how you count Calcasieu Pass in there and its availability. But roughly 13 BCF a day. We have another 13 BCF a day that's currently under construction, and so that is coming on. That'll be on by 2032. Unfortunately, for this winter and likely even into next winter, it doesn't look like we're going to have a lot of incremental capacity coming on beyond what we had this last year. Golden Pass just announced recently that they're pushing theirs back to the first half of 25, and the Venture Global Plaquemines project will be coming on within that same time frame, and then as well the Cheniere Corpus Christi 3 project will be coming on. So those projects add about another 7.5 BCF a day that'll come on likely before or kind of into the first part of 26. So the good news is there's a lot of new capacity coming on. It is not going to be on, there's not much incremental capacity that's going to be available this winter, and looks like it'll be probably 25 before we see much of that. So that's the picture on that front. I think as we saw last year, that's unfortunate because even though we were able to help support Europe last year, all that really meant was that other countries that would have been using the gas turned around and used coal instead and increased emissions around the world. So it was kind of a price game, so to speak. But to the degree that we're not exporting enough natural gas out of the U.S., we are just increasing coal usage somewhere in the world and obviously increasing emissions with that step. So we're working hard in the U.S. The good news is we have plenty of supply. We set a new record for production in October. We set another record, it looks like, here in November. We're up to about 106 BCF a day now in the U.S., and we have plenty of capability of going beyond that. But even in the U.S., we have a lot of constraints in areas where we're still burning coal or we're still burning fuel oil because we're not doing the permitting required to get the infrastructure built. So the good news is a lot of the LNG capacity is coming out of the Gulf Coast, and a lot of those projects are within the state and therefore avoid our NEPA process for permitting. And so those projects, there's about another 4.5 BCF a day of new capacity coming out of the Haynesville and another 2.5 BCF a day coming out of the Permian that will help match that 7.5 BCF a day coming. So I'd say the bottom line picture on this is in the short term, not so good. In the long term, very good. And we're going to be well positioned to help support Europe in the future. Finally, I would just say on the methane emissions front, we are making so much progress on that front. as a country. A lot of the Page companies, EQT is a producer, works closely with us and works to do emissions monitoring through a project or an investment that we made called Context Labs. And this actually is blockchain technology that is tracking all the way from the point of production all the way through the gathering systems, the processing systems, the transmission systems, and ultimately to the point of loading. And so people kind of want to oversimplify this monitoring and verification. We are taking it very seriously, and we're not trying to do something that will be assailable, because we know there will be a lot of critique, and rightfully so. We welcome the transparency and we welcome the critique. We are definitely trying to get it right, and we're going to be able to deliver gas to the border that will be net zero gas, and we're fairly confident in our ability to do that from a lot of the regions in the U.S. So we're excited about more and more focus on fugitive methane emissions. We think we can conquer that, and we're excited to show what we can deliver on that front.
Great, thanks, Alan. Well, energy security isn't just about gas, it's about diversification, as we've heard from many folks here today. And next I want to introduce Grant Isaac, who's both the Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Cameco. You just acquired Westinghouse and made a big acquisition. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what's the outlook for nuclear in Europe, and on what kind of timetable. When could we really see any significant growth in nuclear in Europe?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to the Atlantic Council for inviting us. These are not the kind of rooms we used to get into in the nuclear business. We were kind of the skunk in the room if we did show up, but it's changed dramatically. The answer to your question 3 years ago would have been, in this part of in the European context, nuclear was a bit of a melting ice cube. It was just the energy source that was going to go away over time and be replaced by a lot of things. And then phase 2 happened, which was, well, actually, we need it to stick around long enough to enable the transition to that world of all renewables, or whatever that vision was. But now we're fully in kind of a third phase with nuclear, which is it actually has to remain, and it has to grow. On Saturday here at COP, the announcement about the tripling of nuclear power. 24 countries signed on. We expect more countries to sign on. So if I think about it just in the last decade or so, if the window after the Fukushima event was the perfect storm, this is the perfect dawn for the nuclear industry. It's quite a remarkable turnaround for sure. And the reasons why are just very simple. Clean energy crisis is colliding with a secure energy crisis. On the clean energy side, nuclear is a power source that's 100% base load and 100% carbon free. And in a world where carbon has replaced radiation as the invisible existential enemy that everybody should be focused on, the willingness to think about nuclear in the policy toolbox has just gone up dramatically. And on the secure energy side, it's really important to remember how firm and hardened nuclear assets are. If you're running a light water reactor and you've just been through a fuel outage, you're going to run for 18 months uninterrupted. And then if you've got fabricated fuel bundles at your reactor site, which everyone does, you can do another reload, maybe a second reload after that. You can run for perhaps years until more fuel shows up. So it's firm, it's secure, and it's clean, and it's just created a really good situation for our industry right now. In terms of timelines, a lot of folks think about it in the context of new build, but it's important to remember it's a little bit different in nuclear, because the first nuclear capacity that we're seeing are the reactors that we thought were going to shut down are being saved. So they were out of the models just a few short years ago. They're back in. So that timeline is now. And then we're seeing kind of the medium-term timeline improve too. The US, Canada pioneered reactor life extensions, but a lot of jurisdictions hadn't considered it. You know, you licensed those first reactors for 40 years and then you were just going to retire them. But there's no need actually to retire them after 40 years. And now we're seeing more and more jurisdictions consider 20 more years at a time. And in fact, you've got some reactors that are now rated to go to 80 years. So that's the medium-term timeline, and that's before us. It doesn't actually require a new reactor. And then you move out to the new builds, and we're seeing the new builds pick up steam in places where they are still installing baseload power. And now we're seeing new builds enter markets that you would consider mature and maybe not think about needing a gigawatt scale reactor. Those markets are going after new build as well. So you're connecting that whole demand curve from the short term right through to the longer term in a way we haven't seen before. So the timelines are: keep the capacity you have in the near term, extend the capacity you have in the medium term, and then connect it to more capacity in the future. So it's a very good situation for our industry right now.
Good to hear, thanks. And yes, the best comp for nuclear, I think, probably in history, so enjoy. Let me turn next to Jake Levine, who's Chief Climate Officer for the Development Finance Corporation in the U.S. Can you talk a little bit, Jake, about what the U.S. is doing and what DFC is doing in particular to help Europe both manage its energy and climate security in both this winter and going forward?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Dave, and thanks, Fred, and to the Atlantic Council for convening this important discussion, and so many important discussions throughout the course of this COP. Let me start by telling you a little bit about what we're doing in Ukraine, because this is a country where we are extremely active. We have been in Ukraine since before the war. We are in Ukraine now with $425 million of new investment since the beginning of the war, and we'll be with Ukraine after the war. We have about $800 million of exposure in Ukraine today. Roughly half of that is through our political risk insurance tool. And a lot of it is in the energy sector, including in the nuclear space, where we have a project to ensure the storage of fuel. And I think the bottom line for us is that we are dedicating every single tool in our toolbox, whether that's our insurance, our lending capacity, our equity investment capacity, our technical assistance, to help Ukraine keep its economy moving, to keep people employed, to keep a tax base intact during this war. Some of the transactions that we've committed recently have been in partnership with the financial services sector, providing liquidity to banks to support local businesses. Some have been in the space of food security, working with protein producers to help them on their debt burdens. Some have been in the space of clean energy, including with a technical assistance grant that will go to a wind power manufacturing project. But I think, the thing to just sort of tie this back into the COP and remember why we're here in Dubai, that we've found to be incredibly inspiring beyond just the grit and resilience of this Ukrainian country and these Ukrainian businesses and communities and people, has been the tremendous innovation that Ukraine has brought to bear on the way that it thinks about the energy future there. I had the opportunity to be in Kyiv in February with our CEO, who has taken 3 trips to Ukraine as part of this major surge of investment that we're directing there. And you take the overnight train and 10 hours from eastern Poland into Ukraine, and you sort of wonder what are you going to encounter. When we arrived in Kyiv that morning, the first stop we made was to Ukrenergo, and to visit with the CEO and the company to learn about their energy security strategy. And we immediately were toured around the buildings just outside their headquarters that had been struck by missiles that were targeting the Ukrenergo control center, which is viewed by Russia to be critical infrastructure. This is energy infrastructure that is keeping the country electrified, that's keeping the economy afloat. 10 minutes into our meeting, the sirens went off, and everybody sort of waited for a minute and then decided, okay, we should go down to the bunker. We took the meeting down into the bunker, where we encountered 100 Ukrenergo employees sitting on their laptops and benches under concrete walls, people just doing their job like they do every single day, building out a secure grid. But when we started to talk about the substance of what they wanted to explore with us, it was all about investments in a decarbonized, decentralized, more secure grid that could integrate renewable energy, affordable, clean, reliable, that could integrate nuclear energy, and that really saw itself as a source of clean energy in the East for export to the West. Obviously, they had recently completed their integration with ENSO-E. They have continued to work through other various EU integration matters. But Ukraine envisions for itself a future, and I think so much credit is due to Minister Halushenko for this leadership of being not just a resilient energy sector for its own domestic needs, but a place that could be a hub for clean energy for the West. And this has sort of been an inspiration for DFC in terms of how we've thought about our strategy in the region when we work under our authorities in the European Energy Security and Diversification Act to support countries in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and in the transactions that we've been able to do, for example, recently completing a $545 million loan guarantee to the Czech grid operator called Energo Pro, which will allow them to upgrade grids in Georgia and Bulgaria to integrate renewable energy in to reduce dependence on the fossil fuels that had left so many countries vulnerable. Now, at the same time, we recognize the need for immediate support. And so we have helped Poland, we've helped Moldova. We're working with those countries to help them turn down the dial on imports of Russian gas and import from elsewhere. We've been proud to do that. But as we do that work, we are focused on also identifying opportunities in the explosion of growth that we're seeing in offshore wind, in onshore wind and solar. In one area in particular that has been extremely inspiring, which has been the growth of heat pumps. 100% plus year-over-year growth due to the volatility of pricing in the gas markets where consumers are just getting squeezed. They want to find technological interventions to diversify. The last thing that I'll note is nuclear is going to be an enormous part of this future. I had the opportunity to sign a letter of interest with a SMR developer called Orlen Synthos, which is developing a series of SMRs across Poland in partnership with GE and Hitachi. We see this as a critical development. We know it's a ways off, but DFC is going to be there to support this industry, and we're looking forward to working with folks here to do that.
Great, thank you, and thank you for those incredible stories of courage and resilience from Ukraine. At the Atlantic Council, we spent a lot of time thinking about Ukraine reconstruction and how to reinvent that energy system. In fact, a lot of time this week talking about Ukraine reconstruction and how to reinvent that system. And I want to come back to how, both for Ukraine and Europe. But first, let me turn to my old friend, Mary Warick, Deputy Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. Mary, you all have been at the center of this crisis from the beginning with recommendations, data analysis, and support, and participated in every international meeting. So I wonder if you could talk about three things. One, what does the winter look like in terms of storage and supply and the ability to get through the winter? Second, how is Europe doing on permanently ridding itself of dependence on Russian gas in terms of restructuring? And also the question I asked earlier, if we are in a situation where this conflict remains frozen for a couple of years and we don't get a quick resolution, is Europe prepared, or what more needs to be done to have long-term energy security as all of these other kinds of redirection of the energy system take place?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. It's a real pleasure to be here and to hear from everyone on this panel. Regret I didn't have an opportunity to be here for more of your discussions earlier this week, but thank you so much for including me. I really want to pick up on the Vice Minister's remarks a little bit to just really acknowledge how much hard and important work that Europe has done over the past year and a half. We're getting on 2 years now, to tell you the truth. But I think that it's quite clear that they've taken so many intentional measures that have really positioned itself really across the EU to be in a much better situation this winter than anticipated, but very much big credit to all the work done in terms of diversification, very intentional work in terms of filling up gas storages. As of November 1, they were 99% filled. This doesn't just happen without real planning. And the kinds of things that were mentioned with regard to additional connections and so on has also played an important role. There's no question that the events of February of 2022 were really quite a wake-up call in terms of diversification, and that's a lesson I think that Europe has taken incredibly seriously, and in that regard has really stepped up its investments in renewables, taken very strong measures in terms of energy efficiency. Just a couple of statistics on the demand side. Natural gas consumption across Europe fell by 13% in 2022, 70 BCM, the biggest decline in history. And for the first 9 months of 2023, we're also seeing a further decline of 9%. Overall, globally, we're expecting fairly flat demand, so not necessarily a big shift. Despite these gains being made in Europe, there's still strong demand in parts of Asia, as you will know, and with China making a big contribution. But on the diversification front, of course, the very strong efforts to move towards LNG and to reduce dependence on Russian gas has also been really significant as well. So by our accounting, Russian gas exports to the EU fell by almost half in 2022. We're seeing further declines. It's being halved further. So since Russia's invasion, the EU has reduced reliance on Russian gas by 70%. Really very important on the diversification side. And as I said, I think the biggest and maybe most important gain has been the effort to really double down in terms of investments in clean energy. And that's going to continue to be just so important in terms of completely reducing dependence on Russian gas, but also really addressing the broader energy security issues going forward. So we think that it's a very good story that Europe has to tell. It hasn't happened without a lot of intentionality, for sure. But I think kind of the commonality of effort here has really been very important. And largely because of a lot of the progress we've seen in Europe, we can point to 2022, and we've done this quite consistently and seen positive gains globally in terms of the increases in clean energy investment, increase in demand for heat pumps that was just mentioned, increase in energy efficiency gains, and also in such things as electrolyzers and electric vehicle sales as well. So yes, these trends really need to go along much further. There's no doubt, but as you've seen coming to as we are now sitting in COP, some of the big themes now under discussion very much fall in line with these, with the urgency of continued acceleration of tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency gains, and in the oil and gas sector too, really looking for more progress in terms of methane emissions reductions and other progress there as well. So no doubt, I think we're never out of the woods when it comes to global energy risks. Who would have predicted exactly where we ended up, almost 2 years ago? And we, of course, at the IEA continue to follow the markets very closely, and we'll continue to do so going forward. But I think circling back to Europe, you're about as well positioned as you could.
That's good news. I want to talk a little bit about cost inflation because we've got a lot of aspiration in the United States and other places, But the reality right now is clean energy projects are facing some very serious headwinds. Interest rates are high, and labor is short, and just the entire supply chain of the parts needed is slow, and that costs money. And even in the oil and gas space, I think some of these delays of projects are trying to deal with market uncertainties. So in order to move fast, I think we've got to look at some new tools. So I guess I want to start with Grant, with you and Alan. From an investor point of view, what do you need from governments in terms of government support, framework, or incentives to be able to move more quickly? And then I want to ask our colleagues, starting with the Vice Minister and then Mary, in terms of of what you think governments can do or are planning to do. What's the framework look like to accelerate deployment of clean energy and encourage investment? Grant, do you want to start?
Yeah, happy to do that. When our industry has not escaped any of the inflationary challenges or project development challenges that other industries have dealt with. So I won't dwell on that because I think everybody's familiar with it. But let's talk about the things that have plagued nuclear in the past. And so from a cost point of view, when you think about deploying the technology, it all begins with scope. Nuclear reactor designs have to be locked down before you start procuring and before you start building. And if you don't believe that story, just ask the folks at Southern Companies with respect to the Vogtle plant. That was not a great example of project delivery, but the good news is the industry is learning from these examples, locking down these designs, and hopefully accelerating that transition from first of a kind to nth of a kind. In the nuclear space, it's a rush to be second. Nobody wants to build the first one. They want someone else to build the first one, and then you follow, and you be a very fast follower and try to do it on a marginal cost basis while somebody else has to pay all the average costs. So the industry is poised to kind of deal with that upfront challenge of, well, we let the industry go dormant for several decades. And then all of a sudden we turned around and said, well, where are the nuclear engineers and where are the people that can build this industry out? So get the scope right first, then get the benefits of scale and start not building, a first of a kind every time, but start benefiting from the scale. And this is happening. You don't have to go very far down the road in the UAE and see the Baraka plants. I was there a number of years ago when, the first one was 75% complete and the second one was 50 and then 25 and then the fourth one was just starting, and now of course the fourth one's going to be added to the grid very shortly. So the industry has kind of figured that piece out, hopefully, in a way that really plagued it in the past. From a regulatory point of view, the only thing I would observe is regulators have come to understand that they play a really important role in this too, by just thinking about a reactor as a product, not a project, right? A reactor, a light water reactor is just a kettle. All it does is boil water. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And what we did was we regulated them as though the one that you're going to build right here has never been built before anywhere on the planet. And what regulators are saying is if we're going to play a really instrumental role in this, we need to regulate a reactor as a product. And then when that product is deployed, we regulate the specific issues with respect to that site it's being deployed at. But we don't go back to square one with the product and the project and layer all that burden on it. So there are some regulatory improvements, there's some project improvements. The industry has to deliver, and so watch those two items.
That's great. Alan, I know the Williams companies are not in Europe, but you can probably extrapolate to the kinds of things which enable projects to get done more quickly. What's your short wish list?
Yeah, this is such a big issue actually in the U.S., both in terms of our ability to utilize natural gas to reduce emissions. We're still burning a lot of coal in the U.S. We have a lot of opportunity to reduce emissions, but our ability to get projects permitted has become very difficult. And it's not just pipelines, it's our transmission systems, it's really about anything you want to name that's infrastructure and energy related. Our permitting processes have gotten very tangled up. We've had 2 CO2 sequestration systems get stopped in their tracks over permitting and right-of-way issues. And so we have got to figure out and streamline our permitting process in the U.S. Our cost inflation, if you look at materials, contractor costs, those are not going up. What is going up is the length of time that it takes to get things built and the mutually exclusive permitting requirements that you get from local, state, and federal requirements, and the judicial process that we've left so many handles on our projects through our NEPA processes that about anybody can come in and stop a project. And that is causing, I think sometimes people really underestimate the impact of that, because the next time you go to a boardroom to try to get a project approved, your cost of capital has got to be double what it is when you start seeing projects stopped in their tracks. It's costing billions of dollars and getting stopped. You're no longer building projects for a 12% return when you've got dry hole risk in the billions of dollars for projects. And that is mounting in the U.S. in terms of the cost of capital behind these projects and the timeline that it takes to get them completed. So we have a lot to offer in the U.S., but we've really got to work to streamline our judicial processes in the U.S. so that it's not so easy to stop projects in their tracks.
Great. Vice Minister, they do things a little bit differently in Europe, and sometimes they're pre-clearing areas. It's not quite as laborious as in the U.S., but if you could comment in terms of just the framework for encouraging clean energy and other deployment, what sort of strategies is Lithuania or the European Union using to expedite investment?
On this topic, I would say two main issues should be mentioned from the state point of view. First of all, it's long-term strategy. The other one is the regulatory framework that enables for the investors to invest and flexibly deploy the projects. So first of all, this reminds me of 2009 when Lithuania closed down the nuclear power plant in Ignalina. And afterwards, actually, there haven't been done active investment decisions on the development of national generation. It was Lithuania was relying on the imports, on building interconnectors with Sweden, Poland, and so on. But in the light of war, as we already spoke today, it became clear that national generation is the matter of national security, is a very important part of national security. Therefore, long-term strategy on what our goals are and what legal framework we are providing for the investors is very important. So therefore, Lithuania is focusing on renewables until 2030. We are aiming to become 100% self-sufficient on electricity, on renewables, and then we are now already working on the long-term strategy, what is going to happen afterwards. Baseload and the flexibility services, because we know that the renewables, not only offshore, onshore wind and solar, but they have to be covered and the system has to work safely. And the other very important aspect is to react very flexibly and fast. What we did last year in Lithuania, we already adopted the package, we call it a breakthrough package for the investors in Lithuania, developing renewables. So our goal is to have as much as possible until 2030, and therefore I think it's the responsibility of the governments to implement as flexible permitting procedures and regulatory framework which is not full of the bureaucratic elements, and if we can do the permitting procedures as fast as possible, if we can also have cooperation between the local communities and the investors, which is also mentioned as a very important aspect, that is a responsibility of the governments, and that's what we are focusing on.
That's terrific. That's a great plan. We've got literally under 2 minutes left, so I'm going to come to Jake, and then Mary, I'll give you the last word. But I wonder if you could just give your sort of top 2 or 3 suggestions of tools, whether it's credit support or things like that, that governments ought to be considering to try and encourage investment. And Mary, you're the IEA. I'm sure you've got a paper on your top 10 recommendations. If you could just give us 2 or 3 of those, we'll finish with you. Jake?
Thanks. Well, let me start by just thanking the Vice Minister and her leadership. And I know there are so many countries, whether we're talking about the Baltics or the Balkans, where real leadership is being brought to bear in terms of articulating a vision for a clean energy transition that also delivers energy security. And that cannot get done without the leadership of those governments. I think about, in addition to the excellent work of Lithuania, also the work underway in Kosovo, where the government has articulated a plan to shut down 2 of the dirtiest, most polluting coal-fired power plants in Europe and replace those with clean energy, with renewable energy plus storage. Now, we are seeing the cost of capital go up. That's where companies should come to people like DFC, EBRD, EIB, to seek help on the use of credit-enhancing tools like guarantees, insurance. We also do financing. We're not going to compete with the private sector, but where we can be additional in terms of extended tenors, in terms of other flexible terms, we would like to do that. Ultimately, I think we're going to see this transition happening faster than people think, because money will chase growth. Growth is happening in these clean energy industries, and the financing will work out.
Fantastic. Mary, super quick, what's your...
Well, so much has already been said. I mean, certainly the question of permitting on the regulatory side is frequently mentioned, and no doubt that's an area that governments really need to focus on in policy terms. There's no question, too, that the important incentive programs, such as the US IRA, have been so important, and we've seen elsewhere around the world, too, when governments really focus on what the key outcomes need to be and figure out what needs to be done to incentivize investment in some of these sectors and new technologies in particular that are going to help us unlock some of the hard-to-abate sectors will be really, really key. And I'm glad you mentioned the cost of capital, because on the investment and financing side, really finding ways to accelerate investment in emerging and developing economies in the clean energy transition, and addressing this cost of capital issue, both with concessional financing that will unlock the private sector capital that is out there, is going to be so incredibly important. And prioritizing, which is very much in connection with this notion of sort of long-term strategizing and figuring out what needs to be done. Some of you may have seen our grids report that came out a few weeks ago, which identifies one of the biggest challenges out there right now for finding ways to bring onto the market, so much of the renewable generation that's already taking place. Something like 80 million kilometers of grids need to be built, and this is going to require investment.
Terrific. Well, thanks. Fred always likes us to end on a note of optimism, and so I think we've heard a lot of optimism here that in terms of gas security, Europe is in good shape this winter. In terms of U.S. support, help is on the way, more coming, not this winter, but going forward. In terms of investment, there is tremendous leadership, at the country level and the European Union level, and there is investment tools and strategies that can be used to accomplish this goal. So that's great news. So if everyone can give a hand to our panel here, we'll turn things over to Fred.